Let's dive right in. The basic idea in this tutorial is to take any PDF and import it into Blender to animate or showcase. I originally intended to use this for scientific journal articles, but it could potentially be useful for any PDF document. The workflow is as follows. Separate a PDF into images using the add-on I created, which is available for free on Gumroad. Import the images using Blender's existing Images as Planes add-on. And finally, use the paper stack nodes, also available for free on Gumroad, to create stacks and animations. As usual, there are timestamps and links below. The add-on I designed is specifically for converting PDFs into a series of image files. It was developed in Blender version 3.4, but it's been tested in versions 3.3 up to 3.6. All of my testing was done on Windows 10 and 11, so I'm not sure how this will work on Mac OS or Linux. If the add-on does not work for your system, there are plenty of online converters that change PDFs into image sequences, and you can use one of those and jump ahead to the section on the Import Images as Planes add-ons, which is linked in the timestamps. I haven't had time to fully stress test this yet, so there are sometimes errors, but there's a troubleshooting section towards the end of the video if you run into problems. Once you've downloaded the add-on from Gumroad, you can install it in Blender by coming to Edit, Preferences, Install under the add-on section, and simply find the zip file and click Install. You should end up getting an option for 3D View, CGFigures PDF2Images, and as of the release of this video, the version is 1.05. Simply enable the icon, and it should work without any problems. The add-on is set to create 300 dpi PNG files by default, which you can see from the description, but there are also controls for selecting the file type and setting a custom resolution. To work with the actual add-on, simply come to the camera icon here, scroll down until you see the add-on, convert PDF to images, and from there you choose the PDF that you want, along with your settings. I find 300 dpi is sufficient for most close-up shots where you want crisp images, particularly in cycles, though this does work with Eevee. That said, for background elements you might want to drop to 72 dpi. Long papers with a lot of images can also very quickly take up a lot of space, and so they're usually better at lower dpi. If you want to toggle between a PNG or a JPEG, simply switch between the 0 and the 1. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to a demo file by simply selecting the folder icon. Once I've found the correct PDF file, I'm going to accept, adjust the settings however I'd like them to work out, so this time I'm going to go with a 72 dpi, series of JPEGs, and then I'll hit Convert to Images. Blender will usually take a little bit of time at this point, but for smaller files, and especially when you set the resolution lower, it's pretty quick. Once you hit Convert and Blender has finished processing, it will create a new folder in the same directory as your PDF. The folder will have the name of whatever the PDF was, and a little tag on the side that says Pages. If you open this, you'll find all of the pages for the PDF you chose in order, from 1 to whatever the page count is. The reason it creates everything in this new folder is because if you choose a particularly large paper, say a review that has 70 or even 150 pages, you might not want them all to be in the same folder where you had the original PDF, especially if you store multiple things. One note is that you will likely get an error if you run this twice on the same PDF or on PDFs with the same name if the directory already exists. With all of our pages separated out into images, we can now return to Blender and get going on making our stack of papers. To import our image sequence, we're going to use the excellent Import Images as Planes add-on that ships by default with Blender. To activate it, come to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and simply search for Images. You'll find the add-on here, make sure that this box is checked, and once it is, we're good to go. The settings vary a little bit between different versions of this add-on depending on which version of Blender you're using, but the key things are all the same. I'll start by deleting the default cube and then hitting Shift-A, looking for Images and Images as Planes. For this option to be available, you have to make sure the add-on is installed. Once we click this, we can choose our file with the image sequence. Once I've navigated to the directory that has my image sequence, I'm going to make sure that they're ordered by first clicking Name, doing this twice, making sure that everything is going from 1 to the final page number. From there, I'll hit A to select everything, and then under the settings, I'm going to make some small changes. I'm going to set the blend mode to opaque, and I'm also going to set the shadow to opaque. I'm going to keep the principled shader, and then from here, I'll scroll down and disable the alpha value. This might vary a little bit, as I mentioned, between the different versions, but the core settings are the same. Under the position, I'm going to choose -Z, and I'm going to keep the default option of 0.1. Further down, I can simply choose an align axes, and for this, I'm going to choose Z up. Once all of these settings are in place, simply import images as planes. This will take a second. I'm going to hold down Shift, select the top plane so that it is light yellow. We'll zoom in on that. And then I'm going to hit Control J to join all of those pages together. This is now a single object. You can see it up here, page 1. I'm going to hit F2 and rename this to paper. And if we were to hit Z and come into rendered view, you'd be able to see this is our paper stack with all of the individual pages correctly aligned. Note that the images here are referenced by Blender on your system to the directory that you pulled the images from. If I wanted to send this file to someone else, I would have to pack the images into this file, otherwise they would not appear. To do that, simply come to File, External Data, and choose Pack Resources. If your image files are large, then this will also make your blend file quite large. The paper stack nodes can also be downloaded from Gumroad, and they're very easy to use. Start by appending them into your file or using them through the asset browser if you prefer that workflow. The default asset for the paper object comes with a simple animation setup that we'll look at in the next section. We can quickly append all of the essential paper stack nodes by coming to File, Append, navigating to the relevant file in the appropriate directory, and then choosing under the objects the paper stack. This by default comes with all the major important nodes bundled into it. This will import a version of the paper that we're using as a demonstration file, and we don't need this, so we're just going to delete it. From there, we can simply select our paper stack, come to the Geometry Nodes tab, and create a new GeoNodes tree. From here, use Shift-A, come to Group, and choose the Paper Stacks node. Put this between the input and the output, and if we zoom in, we can see that this has flattened our paper into a paper-thin stack. And we can control a few things about this right away, including the page offsets, as well as the page order by simply flipping to the first to last or last to first. There are a number of extra nodes that can also be applied, and they allow for basic animations. These include separating the pages along a line or fanning the pages out based on the size. These should work for any size page, and you can play around with options to achieve different effects. As these develop, I may add more nodes for quick effects. You can also combine these nodes with modifiers or even physics simulations to create more involved animations. The key simple ones are position first and last, which allow you to move in any axes that you would like, specific pages up or down. You can even select which pages you want if you only want to move one of them. For instance, let's say I only want to move page 1. Now I can freely move that page around in this scene. The other common node for animation is the Fan Pages node, which is best used in combination with the paper offsets. Simply plug the width into the X, the length into the Y, and you can then choose which axes you would like to spin around using the toggle here. This also gives control over the range of the animation, so you can start and stop. And again, you have a selection for which pages you'd like to impact. From here, we'll do a quick walkthrough of the animation that you saw at the beginning of this tutorial, where I fan out a series of pages and choose one and bring it out above the rest, and then fold it all back together. We'll break down the default file paper stack animation in the Geometry Nodes tab. If I simply go ahead and hit play, you can see the cards fan out, one card comes up, then it goes back down, and the fan closes. This is a relatively simple animation. In fact, these 3 nodes over here are only so that they can import all of the relevant nodes when you're working with the asset. All of the animation is being done by the position first and last and fan pages. We can isolate each of these effects by using M, the M key, to mute these specific nodes. So I've muted the position first and last. You can see now I just have the card spring, or the fan as it were. And if I were to unmute that and to change, so I'm muting the fan pages, again with the M key, you can see now I'm just bringing one page up and then back down. It's relevant which order these are done in, but we're going to look at both of these nodes and kind of explore a little bit more of their capabilities in depth. So I'm going to unmute that, and I'm going to use Alt and left click to pull this out of the node tree, and the same for the position first and last. Let's add in the default fan pages node with Shift-A, Group, Fan Pages, You can see right away I'm spinning, but I don't know where I'm spinning. So it's around an axis and it's minus pi. I can choose the axes with the toggle for X, Y, or Z, 0, 1, or 2. And by doing that, I can alternate between the different options here. If I keep it on the default option of 0 for X, then I need an offset to sort of have this be meaningful. If I change in X, that doesn't do anything. If I change in Z, I can get a sort of long, interesting arcing animation, swooping down like this. But really, this is meant to be used with a Y offset. You can see that right here. And that is why the page offsets are connected this way, so that if I wanted this to be exactly the length, I can do that. Similarly, if I were rotating in the y-axis, then I would maybe want to use exactly the width. So that would spring around this point. But you can also change this so that it arcs kind of in whatever direction you'd like. So we'll set this back to x, and now you can see that if I change this y value, I'm creating an arc around sort of this point here, and I can animate that in or out. So again, all the way here, and this is a nice way to sort of make these springing animations. And you can add in bonus offsets if you want. It won't do anything for X, since that's what I'm set to right now, but it will have an impact in Z if I change that. You can see I'm going to do this sort of extended thing right here, and this can be interesting to animate if you want to go from something to 0. You do have to be a little bit careful about intersecting pages when you're going to play with these things, though. This is relatively simple to animate, though, because all I want in this specific case is to use the Z-axis, set to 2. I'm going to offset. First, I'll come to a top view. I'll offset along the y-axis so that I've got a nice spring out in that direction. And what I'd like is for the first page to go to 0.5 and the last page to go to minus 0.5. So here you can see that I've got this nice springing animation, and this is just going to control how tight or loose that is. And so I'm going to set this to 2.5. I need some sort of timeline, and I'll open that up now. Just so that I can easily set keyframes. We'll come all the way back to frame 0, or frame 1, rather, and I actually want my first page to start at minus 0.5. I'll hit I over this to add a keyframe, or you can right-click and add a keyframe. Then I'm going to move ahead 24 frames, so we'll come to frame 24. And I'm going to change the first page value to 0.5. From there, I could simply insert a keyframe, and now if I were to reset this, it would fan out. What I'd like is to then be able to move only one page out, and so I'm going to add a first to last, or position first and last, and I'm going to add it before. What I want is to move a specific page. It doesn't really matter which. Let's say that I only want to move page 5. So I'm going to choose page 5 for both first and last. I'll select that as the page range, and now I can move that page. I'm going to move in the y-axis to have it come out like this. If I want to, I could also move it in the x direction, or even in the z direction, which you can't see here, but is pulling it above the stack. Perfect, just like that. And what I'm now going to do is I can again animate this. So on frame 24, let's make sure that we're in the right place. There's frame 24. I'm going to add keyframe with this set to 0. So insert keyframe. Then I'll move ahead to frame 48. And then I can bring this value up and insert another keyframe. So if I reset everything there with shift and left click, I'm gonna go ahead and press play. You can see all of my pages fan out, and I select just this page. And that is exactly what these two nodes were doing. Hypothetically, if I were to move these now, and I were to hold this with Alt and left click, I'll drag it out and I'll move its position. You'll see that this is a little bit of a different effect. So it's going to fan out, and then it kind of slides out this way instead of coming straight out of the stack. That is why the position first to last needs to occur before the fan, because of the way that the rotation is being set up. So we'll remove both of these, add in the original nodes. There's our position first to last. We'll snap that in place. There's our fan pages. And if we reset this finally, play again, all the pages fan out. We select the specific page we want. It slides back in. And if we want to, we could very easily change this or even expose these parameters. So let's say I want to show the user which page they would like to control. I could then do this from the modifier stack and say, I actually want this page to be the one that flies out at the end. And there we go. I have that control very simply. I can change any aspect of this by changing the keyframes, how far this is going to arc out, which axes I'd like to arc it out in, the extent of that, all kinds of controls. From here, we're going to look at one more example of forcing any of these pages kind of along a curve using the nodes, and from there we'll touch on some simple add-on errors and a little bit of feedback. Animating a paper stack along a curve is another relatively common animation. Very straightforward, easy to set up. We'll start by using Shift-A to add in a simple Bezier curve. I'm going to rotate this one 90 degrees in the Z-axis, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees in the Y-axis as well. Control-A and apply that rotation. From there, I'm going to select my paper stack, and I'm actually going to rename this Bezier curve Guide Curve. Then I'm going to grab my paper stack, and in the Modifier tab with the wrench, I'm going to add in a curve modifier, and I'm going to choose my guide curve. You'll have to choose the right axes, and sometimes this is a little bit of exploration. You can see if I go to Y, that's not quite right. If I go to Z, this is pretty much what I want, because I want this paper to fly along this curve coming out in this direction. Now, all I have to do is find a way to separate it and force it to follow the curve. Luckily, I can do that very easily in Geometry Nodes. So I'm going to come to the Geometry Nodes tab, make sure that my paper is selected, make sure that my GeoNodes modifier is selected, and then I'm going to add in a group, position, first and last, place that after my stack. If we come to the rendered view here, you can see now I can offset my first and last page. I think in this case, I'm going to go first along the Y-axis. I can see that's the wrong choice. I'll try it in Z, and that is the correct choice. But if I were to try it in X, this would just offset to the side. So we're going to use the Z-axis here, and this is following along our curve. We can then, hypothetically, grab our curve, tab into edit mode, and I'll grab the endpoint here, hit E to extrude, move it out to the side over there. So you can see our curve is now following this direction. And again, we can press this along, and our paper is going to follow along this guide curve, and we can use this to animate. So for instance, let's just do a very quick animation setup. We'll open another timeline. And on frame 1, I'm going to add an offset of 0. Hit I to add the keyframe, and we'll jump ahead, let's say 24 frames. We'll bring this value up along the Z-axis, just to here, and then we'll insert a keyframe. We'll also insert a keyframe on the position of the last page here, and we'll jump ahead another 24 frames to frame 48. And now we can bring this value up as well, just to about the same value that we have here, insert a keyframe, and if we reset everything, we now have this curve following along, or rather the paper follows along the curve, and simply springs back into place. And so you can use this in combination with all the other nodes, including fanning, to create rather intricate animations for your paper stacks. You can also use this to do very targeted things like land a paper on a desk, following a certain path or trajectory, which is a little bit easier sometimes than trying to set this up with, say, cloth simulation and physics. From here, we'll finally go into a few errors you might encounter with the add-on specifically, and some of the notes that I have on that. The most common issue that you'll run into with the add-on is that the first time you try and hit Convert to Images, you're going to get an error that tells you that you're missing a module. Usually this resolves itself if you simply close Blender and open it again. The module installation in theory happens the first time that you hit that Convert button, and so once it's been done once, it should work the next time with no issues. In rare instances, the add-on will try to install the necessary modules, but it will install them in the wrong place. If this happens, you need to open the console by coming to Window, toggle Console, and then it will tell you where it's trying to install these specific modules. Go to that directory, copy the relevant folder, and move it into the correct installation of Blender. The process for that is a little bit more involved, and I'm working on a separate video that will cover some of those issues moving forward. One other issue I have sometimes encountered is that the full path will not be displayed, and this can cause issues with writing the image files. If you see 2 slashes in the field instead of your directory, namely say your C/ or C:/drive, G, etc., whatever drive you're in, but if you see 2 slashes instead of that when you choose your PDF, that's usually the problem. You can either correct this by writing the full file name, which includes the full directory, or you can try to simply reopen the PDF. I don't have a great solution for this problem yet, but I am trying to work on it, and I'm not entirely sure what causes it, so if you have any sense of it and want to put it in the comments, I would greatly appreciate that. Finally, a note about the paper that is used in the default asset file. The default asset comes with an open access ACS Nano paper published by the Lessard Research Group at the University of Ottawa. It was published in 2021. It's a very interesting paper on purifying nanotubes, and it does a few things that I'm really fond of. Firstly, it thoroughly studies an established procedure to determine if it can be done more efficiently, both in terms of time and resources. Secondly, it is a high threshold for the device statistics. 1,200 thin film transistors were studied for over 30 polymers, and that really drives home that the findings are significant here. And finally, it uses an open source script, which is detailed in the supporting information, to analyze many of the images. As a full disclosure, I was not involved in this paper at all, but I thought it would be fun to bring some attention to the excellent work that my colleagues are doing at the University of Ottawa by presenting it in the asset. I did clear this beforehand with Professor Osard, and this was a paper that we both agreed would be fun to display. So this is the attribution that is necessary for ACS, and the link to this is also provided in the description of both this video and the asset file on Gumroad. I also want to note that this project was heavily inspired by Johnny Matthews' video on creating procedural paper stacks, which he more recently updated. It's also based on the animations used on the Just Have a Think channel on YouTube. Both are excellent, worth checking out. And to wrap everything up, I'd like to note that me taking the time to develop these projects and release them for free is made possible by my supporters on Patreon. CGFigures recently reached my funding milestone of becoming a gold level supporter for the Blender Development Fund. You can now find CGFigures on the gold section on the website for blender.org, which to me is incredibly cool. I believe very heavily in reinvesting in the research tools you use as a community, and it is my privilege to be able to do this through the support of my patrons, so many thanks to them. If you'd like to help me continue to develop these types of tools and resources, and to help CGFigures reach the Platinum Dev Fund level, then consider joining on Patreon. There are links to Patreon and to the CGFigures website in the description. I'm currently overhauling the website, so there are a few new things rolling out. You can expect some changes in the future. And with that, thanks for coming out. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, consider subscribing and sharing it with your friends and colleagues. I'd love to see any animations you make, and you can tag me on Twitter at CGFigures. Until next time, you have yourselves a great old day.